It began with a subtle eye roll that seemed almost imperceptible at first. But in the brightly lit studio, where the air hummed with the low buzz of anticipation, it carried the weight of unspoken judgment, a silent precursor to the storm that was about to unfold on this primetime political panel show where experts and lawmakers gathered to dissect the pressing issues of the day, from fiscal reforms that promised to reshape the economy to immigration challenges that tugged at the very fabric of national identity. And there sat Jessica Tarlov, perched confidently at the edge of her chair, her posture a perfect blend of relaxed assurance and intellectual poise, adjusting her notes with a faint air of superiority that spoke volumes about her background in media and policy analysis, her sharp mind honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of televised debates, where every word could be a weapon or a shield. And as the discussion shifted seamlessly from the intricacies of fiscal reforms, with their graphs and projections that often left viewers glazing over, to the more visceral topic of immigration challenges, complete with stories of families divided and borders strained, Senator John Neely Kennedy was cued to respond, his presence a stark contrast to the polished urbanity of the set, with his characteristic drawl that carried the unmistakable weight of Southern roots that reached deep into the soil of Louisiana, where politics wasn't just a game but a livelihood, intertwined with the rhythms of everyday life. And he started laying out his critique of the current administration's approach, in that deliberate manner of his speaking of porous borders that allowed unchecked flows of people and goods, the human cost buried under layers of bureaucratic jargon that obscured the real suffering on the ground, from overwhelmed small towns to families grappling with loss. But Tarlov couldn't resist interrupting her intervention, coming midway through his point, delivered with a polished smile that masked the edge in her voice, a smile that was equal parts charm and challenge as she said, "Come on, Senator," her tone dripping with a condescension that was subtle, yet cutting like a scalpel wrapped in silk. "Are you sure you're not just parroting talking points from conservative echo chambers, those insulated spaces where facts are filtered through ideology, or do you actually dive into the details beyond the sound bites that play well on certain networks but fall apart under scrutiny?" And in that moment, the room tensed palpably, the co-panelists exchanging quick glances that betrayed a mix of surprise and anticipation, while the host fidgeted with his cue cards, trying to maintain the facade of neutrality in a format designed for sparks to fly. And Kennedy paused, his eyes narrowing slightly in a way that suggested he was measuring his response. But his face remained a mask of composure, unflappable as the ancient oaks that dotted his home state, and he leaned into the microphone, his voice steady, like a river carving through stone over centuries. "Ma'am," he replied, the word itself a nod to old-school courtesy, even in the heat of battle. "I've pored over every clause of those bills, clause by clause, word by word, in dimly lit offices. Long after the sun has set, I've sat in hearings till the wee hours of the morning, debating amendments that folks like you might gloss over in a quick read during a commercial break." And Tarlov chuckled lightly, a sound that echoed through the studio like a dismissal wrapped in amusement, crossing her arms in a gesture that reinforced her defensive stance. "Oh, please, Senator, your party's playbook is all about fear-mongering and outdated rhetoric that harks back to a time when complexity was ignored in favor of simple narratives. Don't pretend like your logic isn't laced with bias that colors every interpretation." And the audience murmured softly, a collective ripple of reaction that sensed the escalation building, like a wave gathering strength before crashing ashore. But Kennedy didn't rise to the bait, refusing to match her energy with anger or volume. Instead, he reached for a slim folder on the table, flipping it open deliberately, each movement calculated to convey preparation rather than haste. "Let's talk facts, then," he said, his tone unwavering. "You claim these policies are compassionate, touting them as humane solutions to a global crisis. But here's the data straight from the source: record crossings that strain resources beyond capacity, overwhelmed border patrols working overtime without adequate support, and communities paying the price in terms of safety and services stretched thin." And as the exchange intensified with each passing second, Tarlov fired back with statistics culled from progressive think tanks, those bastions of data-driven advocacy that often framed issues through a lens of equity and inclusion, painting Kennedy as out of touch with the broader societal shifts. Senator, your folksy charm is cute, endearing even in a nostalgic sort of way, but in the real world, the world beyond regional anecdotes, we need nuanced solutions that account for economic drivers, climate factors, and international obligations, not just folksy anecdotes that play to emotions rather than evidence. And Kennedy's response was measured, carefully calibrated to dismantle without destroying, as he cited specific legislation, line by line, exposing inconsistencies in her arguments with the precision of a surgeon. You see, Miss Tarlov, it's easy to mock from afar, from the comfort of studios in bustling cities, where the impacts are abstract. But when you've walked the halls where laws are forged, halls echoing with the voices of compromise and contention, you learn humility, the kind that comes from knowing no one has a monopoly on truth. And the host tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters, interjecting with a question meant to diffuse. But the dynamic had shifted irrevocably, the air charged with the electricity of intellectual combat, and Tarlov pressed on undeterred, questioning Kennedy's grasp on modern complexities that intertwine domestic policy with global realities. Do you even understand the global implications? The way migration patterns are influenced by trade agreements and geopolitical tensions? Or is it all just regional gripes masquerading as national concern? And Kennedy smiled faintly, a subtle curve of the lips that held no malice but plenty of resolve. I understand enough to know that dismissing someone's intellect because of how they sound, because of an accent shaped by generations of hardworking folks, is the real ignorance, the kind that blinds one to the wisdom in diverse perspectives. And the panel fell quiet for a beat. A momentary hush that allowed the weight of his words to settle like dust after a gust hanging heavy in the recycled air of the studio. And Tarlov rallied quickly, her experience in high-stakes debates kicking in, as she pivoted to accuse him of playing to the base, rallying supporters with rhetoric rather than reason. This isn't about accents or origins, it's about accountability, about holding leaders to standards where policy is based on verifiable facts, not on appeals to tradition. But Kennedy was unrelenting in his quiet firmness, pulling out highlighted reports from his folder, reading excerpts that dismantled her claims point by point. Here's where your narrative crumbles, not under the force of opinion, but the unyielding structure of documented evidence, he said calmly. His delivery devoid of theatrics, yet compelling in its straightforwardness. And the camera captured Tarlov's flicker of surprise, a brief widening of the eyes that betrayed how her confident facade was cracking just a fraction under the pressure of irrefutable counterpoints. And, as the segment wore on, stretching the allotted time with the intensity of the back and forth, Kennedy wove in stories from everyday Americans. Farmers tilling the land under uncertain skies, workers clocking in at factories, facing competition from abroad, families navigating the complexities of a changing world, who felt sidelined by elite discourse that prioritized abstraction over lived experience. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or pixels on a screen. They're lives, flesh and blood stories of resilience and struggle. He emphasized, his voice gaining a layer of passion without raising in volume, and Tarlov attempted a rebuttal drawing on counter-narratives from urban centers, where diversity drove innovation, but her words seemed hollow against his grounded delivery, echoing in the studio like echoes in a canyon. And by the time the commercial break loomed, signaled by the producer's discreet cues, the air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable fog of unresolved conflict that left everyone on edge. And viewers at home were already buzzing online, their fingers flying across keyboards to share clips and opinions, turning what was meant to be a discussion into a spectacle that captured the nation's divided attention. And returning from the commercial break, with the lights dimming slightly before ramping up again, Kennedy sealed the moment with a final reflection that tied it all together. If intelligence is measured by volume or vocabulary, by the speed of speech, or the prestige of one's alma mater, then maybe I've got it wrong all these years. But if it's about serving people honestly, about bridging the gap between policy and practicality, then let's keep talking. Let's delve deeper, without the barriers of assumption. And Tarlov sat straighter in her chair, her retorts sharper but less assured, laced with a hint of defensiveness that hadn't been there at the start. And the debate wasn't just about policy anymore, not merely a clash over borders or budgets. It had evolved into something profound, a clash of styles where slick sophistication met unyielding authenticity, a collision of worldviews that represented broader societal rifts between coasts and heartlands, between theory and application, and Kennedy didn't dominate with aggression or bombast. He commanded with clarity, his words cutting through the noise, like a beacon in fog, leaving the room in a hush that echoed far beyond the studio walls, resonating in living rooms and boardrooms alike, a silence that wasn't empty, but filled with the potential for reflection and change, as the cameras panned out to capture the panel in its entirety. The expressions ranging from contemplative to challenged, and in that extended pause. The true power of the exchange revealed itself not in victory or defeat, but in the raw exposure of preconceptions, the way it forced everyone involved, and those watching, to confront the biases that shaped their perceptions, and, as the host wrapped up the segment with a hurried thank you, the undercurrent of the confrontation lingered, setting the stage for discussions that would spill over into the digital realm and beyond, where the subtleties of body language and tone would be dissected endlessly, turning a momentary spark into a lasting flame that illuminated the divides in American discourse. And Kennedy, with his folder now closed, but his points indelibly made, leaned back slightly, his composure intact, while Tarlov gathered her notes, her mind already racing to the next engagement. But both knew that this wasn't just another panel, it was a pivotal moment that highlighted the enduring tension between perception and reality in the arena of public debate, a reminder that words, when wielded with precision and patience, could silence even the most vocal critics without uttering a single shout. And as the lights faded on the set, the echo of that silence continued to reverberate, drawing in more viewers, sparking more conversations, and ultimately challenging the very framework of how political ideas are exchanged in an age of constant connectivity and division, where every eye roll, every interjection could become the catalyst for broader understanding or deeper entrenchment. But in this case, it leaned toward the former, fostering a dialogue that transcended the immediate topic to touch on the essence of respect, in disagreement. And Kennedy's approach, rooted in facts and fortified by personal conviction, stood as a testament to the power of understatement in a world often dominated by overstatement, leaving an indelible mark on all who witnessed it, whether in real time or through the endless loop of shared videos and analyses that followed, ensuring that the spark ignited that evening would burn brightly long after the broadcast concluded, influencing not just the participants but the audience in ways that rippled outward, encouraging a reevaluation of how we listen, how we speak, and how we judge one another in the public square. In the hours following the broadcast, as the studio lights dimmed and the production crew began packing up their equipment amid whispers of what had just transpired, the clip of that electrifying exchange between Jessica Tarlov and Senator John Neely Kennedy exploded like wildfire across the vast expanse of social platforms, transforming what had been a contained studio debate into a sprawling cultural phenomenon that captured the collective imagination of a digitally connected nation, with hashtags sprouting up organically like digital weeds in a fertile online garden, trending under tags such as #Kennedy, silence, #Tarlov takedown, and #substance over smirk, each one amassing thousands of shares within minutes as users from all corners of the internet dissected every frame of the footage with the fervor of amateur detectives unraveling a mystery, zooming in on Tarlov's initial eye roll that had set the tone for the confrontation, analyzing the micro-expressions that flickered across her face like shadows in twilight, and marveling at Kennedy's unflinching gaze that seemed to pierce through the screen, holding viewers captive in a way that mere words could not. And conservative outlets, ever eager to champion their own, hailed the moment as a masterclass in restraint and rhetorical prowess, featuring it prominently on their home pages, with headlines that screamed triumph such as Kennedy schools Tarlov in epic debate win, or Southern wisdom crushes coastal elitism, complete with embedded videos that looped the key rebuttals for maximum impact. While progressive circles caught somewhat off guard by the viral momentum scrambled to reframe the narrative as nothing more than overblown theater, designed to distract from substantive policy failures, with bloggers and commentators posting lengthy threads that picked apart Kennedy's arguments for perceived flaws, arguing that his folksy style was a veneer for outdated ideologies. Yet even in those spaces, grudging admissions slipped through the cracks, acknowledging the effectiveness of his calm demeanor in an era dominated by histrionics and online forums lit up like city skylines at dusk, with major sites hosting threads that ballooned into hundreds of comments, where participants debated the nuances with passionate keystrokes. Did Tarlov's quip veer too far into elitism, exposing a deeper class divide in media representation? Or was Kennedy's response a calculated performance, honed from years of political theater, a strategic deployment of humility as a weapon against perceived arrogance? And these discussions weren't confined to echo chambers. They spilled over into mixed ideology groups, fostering rare moments of cross-aisle dialogue amid the usual partisan sniping as clips were remixed with dramatic music overlays, perhaps a swelling orchestral score that amplified the tension, or humorous edits that superimposed cartoonish effects on Tarlov's reactions for comedic relief, captioned with witty phrases like, "When smug meets substance, round one to the senator." And influencers, those digital tastemakers with followings in the millions weighed in from their perches on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where short-form videos dissected body language with pseudo-expert analysis. One popular creator breaking down the psychology of Kennedy's deliberate pauses, explaining how they created psychological pressure without uttering a word, while another podcaster replayed the exchange in slow motion, highlighting the rhetoric as a textbook example of ethos over pathos, drawing parallels to historical debates that shaped public opinion long before to the age of algorithms, and bloggers armed with analytics tools delved into the metrics, charting how the video's view count skyrocketed exponentially from a modest few thousand in the first hour to millions by dawn, fueled by shares from verified accounts and ordinary users alike, with one viral post from a comedian garnering laughs by parodying the accents and gestures in a skit that went on to inspire countless imitations. Yet beneath the humor lay a serious undercurrent, as the conversation spilled into unexpected arenas far removed from politics, such as late-night comedians on television, who parodied the exchange in their monologues, exaggerating Tarlov's eye roll into a comedic loop and mimicking Kennedy's drawl with affectionate exaggeration, turning the moment into fodder for national satire that underscored the deeper divide between urban sophistication and rural wisdom, a divide that resonated with audiences who saw reflections of their own experiences in the interplay. And even academic circles chimed in, with scholarly detachment professors from communication departments penning op-eds for prestigious journals that explored the class biases inherent in media portrayals, arguing that this isn't just a debate segment, it's a mirror held up to America's cultural fractures, revealing how accents and origins can become proxies for intellectual dismissal. Oh, and one particularly insightful piece from a sociology expert delved into the semiotics of the silence that followed Kennedy's rebuttal, positing it as a form of nonverbal power that subverted the expected norms of televised conflict, where volume often equates to victory. But here, restraint emerged triumphant. And as the shares multiplied like cells in a petri dish, the narrative evolved in fascinating ways, morphing from a simple recap of the event into a multifaceted discourse on representation with supporters of Kennedy creating dedicated fan pages that compiled his past takedowns into highlight reels portraying him as a defender of the underrepresented, while critics of Tarlov accused her of embodying coastal arrogance, a stereotype that fueled memes depicting her as a caricature of elite detachment, complete with Ivy League props and dismissive gestures. Yet her defenders rallied in kind, praising her for challenging the status quo with unapologetic vigor, framing the exchange as a necessary pushback against complacency in policy discussions, and the clip even crossed international borders with outlets in Europe and Asia. Commenting on the peculiarities of U.S. political theater, one British newspaper drawing comparisons to parliamentary sparring but noting the uniquely American flavor of regional pride versus metropolitan Polish, and in chat groups scattered across apps like Discord and WhatsApp, as well as family dinners where phones were passed around the table. People quoted lines from the debate verbatim, debating who truly won, not just in terms of points scored, but in resonating with the public's mood, with some arguing that Kennedy's appeal lay in his relatability, speaking to those who felt marginalized by mainstream narratives, while others contended that Tarlov's sharpness represented the forward-thinking intellect needed for complex global issues. And amid all this digital cacophony, quieter reflections emerged from unlikely sources, such as mental health advocates who used the incident to discuss the toll of public scrutiny on participants, highlighting how viral moments can amplify personal vulnerabilities in an unforgiving online arena. And communication experts lauded Kennedy's nonverbal cues, the steady gaze, the deliberate handling of his folder, as masterstrokes in persuasion theory, offering webinars and articles that broke down these elements for aspiring debaters, and the event inspired a wave of user-generated content that extended its lifespan from animated recreations that anthropomorphized the arguments into cartoon battles to thoughtful essays posted on personal blogs that pondered the implications for civic discourse, and even merchandise began to pop up on e-commerce sites with T-shirts emblazoned with Kennedy's memorable lines like "Facts over flair," or mugs mocking the eye roll with humorous twists, turning the ephemeral into the tangible, and Tarlov's team monitoring the fallout from behind screens filled with dashboards of sentiment analysis, issued subtle clarifications through social media posts that emphasized her policy points over the personality clash, framing the debate as a healthy exchange of ideas rather than a personal defeat, while Kennedy, ever the understated figure, declined immediate interviews that flooded his office, choosing instead to let the moment speak for itself, though his staff noted a deluge of supportive messages from constituents, many sharing personal anecdotes of feeling undervalued in similar ways, stories of being dismissed in professional settings due to accents or backgrounds, which in turn humanized the broader impact. And by the next news cycle, the story had firmly embedded itself in the cultural zeitgeist, influencing how subsequent panels were moderated, with hosts vowing for more civility in their pre-show briefings, and pundits across the spectrum prepping harder for appearances, arming themselves with data to avoid similar pitfalls. And the digital storm that ensued didn't just amplify the original moment, it reshaped public expectations, proving unequivocally that, in an era saturated with endless content streams vying for attention, authenticity and poise could cut through the clutter like a laser forging connections that transcended screens and sparked real-world conversations, from water-cooler chats in offices to classroom discussions in schools where teachers used the clip as a teaching tool for media literacy, encouraging students to analyze bias and rhetoric, and, as algorithms pushed the content further, recommending it to users based on viewing habits, the reach expanded to demographics that might otherwise tune out politics, drawing in younger audiences through TikTok edits and older ones via Facebook shares, creating a tapestry of engagement that wove together diverse threads of society. And ultimately, this chapter of the saga illustrated the profound power of virality in shaping narratives, where a single studio exchange could ripple outward to influence perceptions, challenge stereotypes, and even inspire incremental changes in how people communicate across divides, reminding all involved that in the grand theater of public opinion, the audience wasn't just passive spectators, but active participants, their reactions fueling the fire that kept the story alive long after the initial broadcast had faded into the archives of televised history, ensuring that the echoes of that digital divide continued to resonate, bridging gaps in unexpected ways and highlighting the enduring human element in an increasingly virtual world. Long after the initial buzz of the broadcast had faded into the background noise of daily news cycles, leaving behind only faint echoes in archived clips and occasional references in passing conversations, the exchange between Jessica Tarlov and Senator John Neely Kennedy continued to exert a subtle yet profound influence on the political landscape, seeping into the very strategies and mindsets of those who navigated the corridors of power, where strategists in both major parties dissected the footage in dimly lit war rooms equipped with whiteboards scrawled with timelines and psychological profiles, using it as a pivotal case study for mastering effective communication in an age where every public utterance could be amplified or dissected indefinitely, with Republican consultants particularly enamored by Kennedy's blueprint of calm, evidence-based engagement rooted in unpretentious relatability, incorporating his techniques into training modules for up-and-coming candidates facing hostile environments on cable news or town hall stages, teaching them how to transform potential mockery into opportunities for momentum without resorting to escalation or emotional outbursts, emphasizing drills where participants practiced deliberate pauses and the art of deploying facts like chess pieces on a board, while Democratic advisors, though more circumspect, acknowledged the pitfalls exposed in Tarlov's approach, integrating lessons on avoiding unintentional elitism into their media prep sessions, urging spokespeople to blend intellectual rigor with accessible language that didn't alienate broader audiences. And these internal shifts manifested in tangible ways, such as revised debate guidelines, circulated among campaign teams, that prioritized substance over spectacle, encouraging nominees to carry physical binders of data as a visual cue of preparedness. Much like Kennedy's folder had become an iconic prop in retrospective analyses. And beyond the partisan silos, nonprofit organizations dedicated to civic education seized upon the moment as a teachable exemplar, developing workshops for young leaders that simulated high-stakes debates, complete with role-playing exercises, where one side embodied assertive critique and the other embodied measured rebuttal, fostering skills in empathy and active listening that aimed to heal the frayed edges of public discourse. And Tarlov herself, renowned for her incisive wit, that had long been her trademark in the cutthroat world of opinion journalism, subtly recalibrated her on-air style in the appearances that followed, delving deeper into preparatory research that went beyond surface-level briefs, often bringing binders bulging with annotated reports and cross-referenced studies to panel discussions, where colleagues in the green rooms noticed a perceptible evolution in her demeanor. More moments of attentive listening during others' monologues, fewer reflexive interruptions that could be perceived as dismissive, and, in rare off-the-record interviews with industry peers, she reflected on the experience as a catalyst for personal growth, framing it not as a setback, but as an opportunity to refine her advocacy, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect in elevating conversations that otherwise devolved into echo chambers. It's about pushing boundaries while building bridges, she confided in one such chat, hinting at a newfound appreciation for the diverse perspectives that enriched rather than undermined robust policy debates. And this introspection led her to engage more actively with grassroots initiatives, traveling to heartland communities she had previously critiqued from the vantage of urban studios. Participating in local forums where she listened to stories from factory workers and small-town entrepreneurs, incorporating those insights into her commentaries to add layers of authenticity that resonated with previously skeptical viewers. Meanwhile, Kennedy's profile ascended in a manner that was characteristically understated, without the fanfare of splashy media tours or self-promotional books, as invitations flooded his office for town halls, keynotes at civic associations, and even advisory roles in bipartisan think tanks focused on rural development, where he steadfastly avoided any hint of gloating over the viral episode, redirecting queries about it toward pressing legislative priorities like bolstering infrastructure in underserved areas or reforming education policies to emphasize vocational training, telling his aides in private huddles that wasn't about scoring points on a screen, it was about amplifying the voices too often drowned out in the din. Tot. And his constituents responded with renewed vigor, organizing community events that celebrated not celebrity, but communal values such as volunteer-driven policy roundtables in church basements and school auditoriums, where ordinary citizens debated issues with the same grounded candor. Kennedy exemplified fostering a grassroots movement that empowered locals to advocate for themselves in state capitals, and the incident's ripple effects extended into institutional reforms across the media ecosystem, prompting major networks to revisit their guidelines for on-air conduct with an eye toward balance and civility, implementing mandatory fact-checking protocols that operated in real time during live segments, where producers in control booths cross-verified claims against databases before allowing them to air unchallenged, and industry associations hosted seminars on bridging ideological divides, inviting speakers from varied socioeconomic backgrounds to share strategies for inclusive dialogue, with one memorable panel featuring linguists who dissected the role of accents in perception, arguing that regional dialects carried cultural capital often undervalued in national narratives. And educators across the spectrum integrated the clip into curricula at universities and high schools alike, using it as a springboard for units on rhetoric and bias, where students analyzed the interplay of verbal and nonverbal cues, debating in essays and group projects, whether true persuasion stemmed from eloquence or evidence with recurring themes, emerging around the idea that intelligence isn't one size fits all. It's a mosaic of experiences, inspiring a generation of learners to approach disagreements with curiosity rather than contempt. And on a more personal level, both Tarlov and Kennedy underwent evolutions that humanized their public personas, with Tarlov branching out into collaborative projects, like co-authoring opinion pieces with unlikely allies from across the aisle, exploring common ground on issues like healthcare access, while Kennedy pursued bipartisan legislative initiatives, co-sponsoring bills on digital literacy that aimed to equip rural populations with tools to navigate online misinformation, and their paths inevitably crossed again at neutral venues such as policy conferences and charity galas, where exchanges were marked by cordiality infused with the wisdom of shared lessons, perhaps a knowing nod or a brief aside, acknowledging the transformative nature of their earlier encounter without dwelling on it, allowing space for forward momentum, and society at large absorbed the impact in multifaceted ways as public discourse trended incrementally toward substance over sensationalism, with audiences demanding more accountability from talking heads through viewer feedback channels and social petitions that called for diverse representation on panels, leading to increased inclusion of voices from non-coastal regions in primetime slots and voter turnout in demographics that identified with Kennedy's archetype working class, and Midwestern saw modest upticks in subsequent elections, attributed in part to a sense of empowerment derived from seeing their worldview validated on a national stage, as people felt not just heard, but represented in the ongoing narrative of governance. And the moment transcended the realm of politics, entirely infiltrating corporate boardrooms, where executives drew parallels to leadership communication, implementing training programs that encouraged executives to adopt Kennedy-like restraint in negotiations, valuing poise as a tool for de-escalation in high-tension mergers or stakeholder meetings, and in family dynamics across households. The episode sparked intergenerational discussions around dinner tables where parents and children explored themes of respect and assumption, using it as a lens to examine their own biases in everyday interactions, fostering healthier communication patterns that reduced conflicts rooted in misunderstanding and community organizations, from libraries hosting debate clubs to online forums, moderating discussions adopted informal codes inspired by the exchange, promoting rules that rewarded clarity and evidence over inflammatory rhetoric, creating safer spaces for idea exchange in an increasingly polarized world. And ultimately, the legacy of that studio showdown endured not as a flashpoint of division, but as a beacon for constructive evolution, redefining success in public arenas, not by the decibels of one's voice or the sharpness of one's barbs, but by the depth of one's principles and the breadth of one's empathy, encouraging a collective shift toward a more thoughtful, united approach to disagreement that prioritized shared humanity over superficial differences, weaving the threads of reflection into the fabric of reform, where every participant in the grand experiment of democracy could find value in pausing, listening, and responding with intentionality, ensuring that the ripples extended far into the future, nurturing a culture where dialogue built bridges rather than walls. And in this way, what began as a singular confrontation blossomed into a catalyst for enduring change, reminding all who encountered its story that true influence arises from the quiet strength of conviction sustained by actions that echo long after words have been spoken, shaping not just policies or perceptions, but the very essence of how a society converses with itself in pursuit of progress and understanding, a testament to the enduring power of measured discourse in an era prone to excess.